Story 1. The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was just past midnight when Alex decided to head home. His office, usually bustling with the sounds of clicking keyboards and ringing phones, had long since emptied, leaving behind a quiet that seemed almost eerie. The rain had started softly earlier in the evening, but now fell in a relentless torrent, transforming the streets into reflective pools of light from the street lamps. Alex's car, an old but reliable sedan, hummed softly as he navigated the wet roads, the wipers working overtime to clear the view ahead. The highway was nearly deserted at this hour, making Alex feel as if he was the only person left in the world. The monotony of the drive and the rhythmic sound of the rain could have been soothing if not for the heavy eyelids that fought against the drowsiness that threatened to overtake him. To stay awake, Alex turned on the radio, flipping through stations until he found one playing a string of classic rock songs. The familiar tunes seemed to help, at least for a while. As he rounded a particularly sharp bend, his headlights caught a figure standing by the roadside. Startled, Alex slowed down, squinting through the rain-soaked windshield. It was a young woman, soaked to the skin, her clothes plastered to her body, signaling desperately for a ride. Her presence was so unexpected on this lonely stretch that Alex hesitated for a moment, the rational part of his brain warning him of late-night horror stories told and retold about picking up strangers. However, seeing her shiver uncontrollably, with no shelter in sight, his compassion overruled his caution. Pulling over, he pressed the button to lower the passenger window. "Do you need a lift?" he called out over the sound of the rain. The woman, who seemed on the verge of collapse, barely managed a nod before clutching the door handle and climbing in. She was shivering violently. "Thank you," she murmured, her teeth chattering as she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, lost against the sound of the storm. "What's your name? And where do you need to go?" Alex asked as he pulled back onto the road, increasing the heater's temperature. "I'm Sarah," she said after a moment, her voice gaining a bit of strength as the warmth began to seep into her bones. "I just need to get to the next town over." Alex nodded, focusing on the road as the rain seemed to intensify, the drops hammering against the car with a ferocity that made him grip the steering wheel a little tighter. Conversation was difficult with the noise, so they sat in silence, the only sounds the steady beating of the rain and the low hum of the engine. Every so often, Alex glanced at Sarah, trying to make out her features in the dim light of the dashboard. Her hair was dark and long, stuck to her face and neck, and her clothes looked like they might have been nice before the rain had ruined them. There was something unsettling about her, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Perhaps it was the way she stared out the window, her eyes fixed on something in the distance, or maybe it was the eerie calmness with which she had accepted the ride from a complete stranger. As they approached the town, a sense of unease began to grow in the pit of Alex's stomach. He had heard stories, of course, urban legends about hitchhikers on deserted roads, ghosts of those who had met untimely ends, forever replaying their last moments. He chided himself for letting his imagination get the better of him. After all, Sarah was just a regular person, wasn't she? "Sarah," he started, intending to ask her for more specific directions, but when he turned to face her, the passenger seat was empty. His heart skipped a beat, his eyes darting back to the road before scanning the mirrors. There was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Shocked, he slowed the car, pulling over as he tried to process what had happened. Had she jumped out? Impossible he would have noticed. But then, where did she go? As the rain continued to pour down, Alex sat there, trying to make sense of the impossible, not knowing that the true explanation was more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. Alex's heart raced as he stared at the empty seat beside him, the dampness of the fabric, the only evidence that Sarah had been there at all. His mind raced, trying to rationalize what he had just witnessed. Had she been real? Had he imagined her presence in his sleep-deprived state? No. The wet imprint on the seat and the lingering scent of rain mixed with perfume were too vivid, too concrete for it to have been a hallucination. He sat in silence, the sound of the rain pounding against the roof of the car like a relentless drum. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone, contemplating who to call at this ungodly hour. He decided against it, realizing how absurd his story would sound. Taking a deep breath, Alex put the car back in gear and drove towards the nearest gas station, hoping to clear his head and maybe get some answers. The fluorescent lights of the gas station were harsh after the dark, soothing cocoon of his car. He got out, his legs stiff from tension, and walked into the convenience store. The clerk, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, looked up from a magazine as Alex entered. "Rough night, huh?" the clerk remarked, noticing Alex's disheveled appearance. "Yeah, you could say that," Alex replied, trying to muster a smile. "Actually, I have a weird question. Have you ever heard any stories about hitchhikers around here? Specifically around the stretch of highway just north of here." The clerk's expression changed subtly, a mix of curiosity and caution crossing his face. "Why do you ask?" Alex hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. "I picked up a woman named Sarah. She was soaked from the rain, needed a ride to the next town, but she disappeared from my car without a trace just before I got here." The color drained from the clerk's face as he listened. When Alex finished, the man swallowed hard and nodded slowly. "I've heard stories, yeah. You're not the first to mention something like this. They say she's the ghost of a girl who died on that highway. Got into a car accident during a storm, much like tonight, 10 years ago to the day. They say she still tries to get home." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. "A ghost," he murmured, more to himself than to the clerk. "That's what they say. Most folks around here think it's just tall tales, but every once in a while, someone comes in just like you looking like they've seen a ghost. Maybe they have," the clerk added, giving Alex a meaningful look. Not sure what to make of the story, Alex thanked the clerk and walked back to his car. The rain had lessened somewhat, but the night felt colder now, more isolating. He decided to drive through to the next town, the one Sarah had been trying to reach, driven by a need for closure more than anything else. As he drove, the reality of the clerk's words sunk in. Could he truly have encountered a ghost? The thought was both terrifying and sad. A young woman, lost and unable to find her way home, replaying her last moments in an endless loop. It was a thought that made the night seem oppressive. The darkness, not just a lack of light, but a tangible presence around him. Reaching the town, Alex drove aimlessly for a while, unsure of his destination. Finally, he stopped near a small park, the grass glistening wetly under the street lights. He got out of the car, the fresh air feeling good in his lungs. He walked around, lost in thought, trying to process the night's events. It was then that he saw it, a small, weather-beaten sign by the roadside. It was a memorial for a traffic accident victim. The name on the sign caught his eye, Sarah McKinley. The date of the accident was exactly 10 years ago, just as the clerk had said. Tears blurred Alex's vision as he read the inscription, a poignant reminder of the young life cut short on that rainy highway. He thought of the Sarah he had met, her silent presence in his car, and the mystery of her disappearance. It all made a tragic kind of sense now. As he stood there, the rain began to fall again, gentle whispers in the quiet night. Alex felt a profound sadness, but also a strange peace. Maybe, in some way, he had helped Sarah on her journey, given her a momentary respite from her eternal wandering. He drove home with a heavy heart, the memory of that night forever etched in his mind. The empty passenger seat beside him didn't feel quite so empty anymore. If you like my stories, please like and subscribe. Story 2, The Phantom Convoy. Jenna had been a long-haul trucker for over a decade, her life dictated by the endless stretches of asphalt that crisscrossed the country. She was used to the loneliness of the road, the silent camaraderie that linked her to other truckers she rarely met outside of truck stops and rest areas. This night, however, was different. A dense, creeping fog had descended over the highway, reducing her world to the few meters of road illuminated by her headlights. The journey tonight was routine, a cargo load of electronics destined for a distribution center across the state line. Jenna knew the route by heart, a straight shot through rural landscapes, small towns, and long, desolate stretches where the only light came from the moon or her own vehicle. But the fog changed everything, muffling sounds and blurring the edges of the world, making familiar landmarks look alien. As she adjusted her radio to a station playing soft rock, an attempt to stave off the monotony and the creeping unease brought on by the fog, she noticed something peculiar in her rearview mirror. It was the dim outline of a truck, old-fashioned by the look of its rounded edges and the way it sat low on the wheels. Jenna blinked, peering into the mirror, trying to focus on details that seemed to shift and waver in the mist. The truck seemed to appear and disappear intermittently, as if it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a figment of her imagination spurred by fatigue. Jenna shook her head, chiding herself for letting the fog get to her. But then another shape emerged beside the first, and then another, until a whole convoy of vintage trucks was trailing behind her, as if they had risen from the mist itself. Curiosity mixed with a slight thrill of fear. Jenna tapped the brakes lightly to get a better look, but the convoy maintained its distance, the old trucks mirroring her speed with eerie precision. The fog seemed to swirl around them, cloaking them in a ghostly veil that made it impossible to see any details of the drivers or the state of the rigs. Deciding it was safer to keep her eyes on the road, Jenna focused ahead, but the presence of the convoy filled her mind with questions. Who were they? Why were they using these old rigs, and where were they heading in such weather? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden break in the fog, a clear patch through which the moon shone brightly, illuminating the convoy and her mirrors for a fleeting moment. In that brief, clear glimpse, Jenna could see that the trucks were indeed old, their bodies battered and worn, paint peeling and surfaces rusted. It struck her, then, that these were not just old trucks. They were relics from a bygone era of trucking, the kind you might see in a museum or a vintage car show, not on a modern highway. The strangeness of the situation unsettled her, and Jenna reached for her CB radio, a habit from the days when truckers would chat regularly to pass the time and share road information. She clicked the button, casting her voice into the ether. "This is Red Hawk to anyone on the I-22. Got a convoy of old-timers riding close behind anyone else seeing this." Static crackled through the speaker, and then a voice, old and crackling like the static itself, replied, "Keep your eyes on the road, Red Hawk. Some journeys don't end. Watch the road." Chills ran down Jenna's spine at the cryptic message. She responded, trying to keep her voice steady. "Copy that. Just curious is all. No harm in looking, but don't stray too close. Stories about those who travel these parts. Stories better left alone." The voice added, before the line went dead, swallowed up by the fog and static once more. As the night deepened, the convoy remained, a spectral presence in her rearview mirror, always there but never overtaking, never coming too close. Jenna felt a mix of fear and fascination. The road had always been her home, a place of freedom and escape, but tonight it felt like a passage through another world, a place where the past and present blurred into one. As Jenna continued her journey, the convoy of ghostly trucks maintained their haunting vigil in her rearview mirror. The fog seemed to thicken, swirling around her rig like a living entity, isolating her further from the familiar world. The occasional clear spots in the mist offered Jenna fleeting relief, but they also sharpened the unnerving sight of the convoy that refused to pass or disappear. Hours into the drive, Jenna approached a stretch of highway known among truckers as the Long Silence, a section so remote that even radio signals rarely pierced its stillness. The fog began to dissipate as she entered the Long Silence, drawing back like a curtain, and Jenna hoped this would dispel her spectral followers as well. She glanced in her mirrors, expecting to see the open road, But the convoy was still there, their presence defiant against the clearing skies. Determined to resolve the mystery, Jenna decided to slow her truck, signaling for the convoy to overtake her. Instead of passing, however, the trucks mirrored her actions, decelerating until all their vehicles were crawling along the highway. Frustrated and now deeply unnerved, Jenna accelerated sharply, her engine growling in the quiet night. The convoy matched her speed with eerie precision, as if bound to her by some unseen force. The moon was full and high, casting a silvery glow over the landscape, making the old trucks look even more spectral and otherworldly. Jenna felt a mix of fear and awe, a tension that was almost palpable in the cab of her truck. She tried the CB radio again, her voice a mix of command and plea. "This is Red Hawk," to the convoy behind. "What do you want from me?" There was no response, just a static hiss that seemed almost mocking in its emptiness. Jenna gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white, her eyes flicking between the road ahead and the ghostly shapes in her mirrors. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the convoy began to fade. One by one, the trucks dissolved into the mist that had thickened anew, as if the fog were swallowing them whole. Stunned, Jenna slowed her truck to a near stop, her heart pounding in her chest. She searched the mirrors, squinting into the night, but there was no sign of the convoy. It was as if the road had swallowed them up, leaving no trace that they had ever been there. The only sounds were her heavy breathing and the idling of her engine, the silence around her feeling oppressive, heavy with unanswered questions. Unsure of whether to feel relieved or more frightened, Jenna pulled over at the next truck stop. Her legs were shaky as she climbed out of the cab, the cool night air a stark contrast to the warm enclosure of her truck. Inside the truck stop, the bright lights and the chatter of other truckers felt both jarring and comforting after the isolation of the road. At the counter, she ordered coffee, her hands wrapping around the warm cup as she tried to make sense of what had happened. A seasoned trucker named Cole noticed her distress and took the seat beside her. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Cole remarked, his voice tinged with concern. Jenna chuckled weakly. "Maybe I did. Or maybe it was just the fog playing tricks on me." She recounted her tale, the convoy of old trucks, their mysterious disappearance, and the strange voices over the radio. Cole listened intently, nodding occasionally. "I've heard tales about the ghost convoy," he said after a moment of reflection. "They say it's the spirits of truckers who lost their lives on the highway, still making their runs, bound by the road even in death." Jenna shivered, the story fitting too neatly with her experience. "Why do they appear?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some say they're looking for company, others think they're a warning," Cole replied, his eyes distant. "Maybe they wanted something from you, or maybe they were just passing through, reminding us that some journeys don't end on the road." The conversation lingered in Jenna's mind as she bid Cole goodbye and returned to her truck. The rest of the night passed uneventfully, but the image of the convoy stayed with her, a ghostly imprint on her memory. As dawn broke over the highway, Jenna felt a profound connection to the road and its hidden stories, a reminder that every mile carried echoes of those who had traveled before her. The road was more than asphalt and signs. It was a tapestry of lives and stories, intertwining the past with the present, the seen with the unseen. Story 3. The Never-Ending Road. Tom had always been the adventurous type, eager to turn every outing into an exploration. His latest road trip with 3 of his college friends, Mia, Derek, and Sarah, was meant to be a break from the monotony of study sessions and exams, a chance to unwind before the next semester started. Their destination was a well-known camping site, located deep in the heart of a sprawling national forest. Tom had planned the route meticulously, choosing a scenic drive that promised stunning views and serene landscapes. The journey started off as expected, with lively conversations and a playlist of their favorite songs filling the car. As they ventured further from the city, the traffic thinned, and the road took them through winding hills and dense forests. The sun was setting, painting the sky with strokes of orange and pink, when Tom noticed a peculiar landmark, an old, rusted tractor half swallowed by the undergrowth on the side of the road. He pointed it out, and the group shared a laugh about how it seemed like a relic from another era. Hours passed and night fell, shrouding everything under a blanket of darkness. The road was poorly lit, and the dense trees on either side seemed to merge into a continuous, indistinct wall of shadows. It was then that Tom noticed the tractor again, rusted and overgrown, exactly as they had seen it before. He chuckled, thinking he'd taken a wrong turn, but a quick check of the GPS confirmed they were still on the correct path. The group's conversation dwindled as Tom's focus narrowed on the road ahead. The music had turned to a low hum in the background. Once more, the tractor appeared by the roadside, its presence now a silent sentinel in the dark. Unease settled over Tom and his friends. Mia, usually the skeptic of the group, voiced what they were all thinking. Are we stuck in some kind of loop? Tom tried to laugh it off, but the repetition was unnerving. He drove more attentively, watching for any new landmark, but again they passed the same small, decrepit gas station they'd noticed an hour earlier. It was impossible. They hadn't turned around, hadn't seen any forks in the road, yet here they were, passing the same points over and over. Deciding to break the cycle, Tom turned the car around at the next opportunity, driving back the way they came, hoping to find a different route or any sign that they were no longer looping. But each turn seemed futile, bringing them back to familiar landmarks. First the tractor, then the gas station. Panic began to seep in, the situation too bizarre to ignore. Frustrated and needing answers, Tom pulled over at the gas station during their next pass. The place was deserted, with boarded-up windows and a faded sign swinging in the breeze. The eerie silence of the place added to their discomfort. Armed with flashlights, they cautiously explored the area. Behind the station, they found a faded map pinned to an old bulletin board, covered in dust and cobwebs. It showed their current road, marked with a series of arrows forming a loop, the words caution. Temporal anomaly zone scrawled across in faded ink. Shocked by the discovery, they quickly returned to the car, their minds racing with the implications. Tom felt a mix of fear and fascination. Here was a real-life mystery, something straight out of the sci-fi books he loved. They decided to keep driving, this time more aware of their surroundings, each landmark a haunting reminder of the loop they were trapped in. As the night deepened, their resolve strengthened. They focused on anything that might break the pattern. Finally, after what felt like several more hours, they spotted a new landmark, a small creek running under the road, not marked on any of their maps or GPS. With a collective sigh of relief, they crossed the bridge over the creek, and the road ahead changed. The forest thinned, and the sky lightened slightly, heralding the approach of dawn and the end of their looping nightmare. Relieved yet exhausted, they drove in silence, the weight of their experience settling over them. They had escaped the loop, but the reality of what they had experienced lingered. It was a reminder of the mysteries hidden in plain sight, the unexplained phenomena that defy logic and understanding. Tom felt a deep sense of awe and a renewed respect for the unknown, his adventurous spirit now tempered with a cautious wonder at the mysteries of the world. After escaping the eerie loop of the same landmarks, Tom and his friends felt an overwhelming relief, mixed with curiosity and a lingering sense of unease. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale light on the road, they realized that the landscape around them had finally changed. No longer were they seeing the repetitive sign of the rusted tractor or the ghostly abandoned gas station. Instead, the road now stretched forward through new scenery, a gentle rise and fall of the hills dotted with fresh wildflowers swaying in the morning breeze. The group was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts, processing the night's surreal events. Tom drove with a renewed focus, determined to put as much distance as possible between them and the loop they had just escaped. The GPS, which had been of no use during their ordeal, now showed clear directions towards their original destination, the camping site, which seemed more inviting than ever. As they continued, Tom couldn't help but revisit the map they had found behind the gas station. The ominous labeled temporal anomaly zone echoed in his mind, suggesting explanations as wild and improbable as the loop itself. Had they really experienced a glitch in time, or was it some natural phenomenon yet unexplained by science? These questions haunted him, but there were no answers, only the road ahead. The mood in the car gradually shifted as the sun rose higher, the early morning light bringing a semblance of normalcy. Mia, always the one to look for logical explanations, broke the silence. "Do you think we should report this? I mean, it could be dangerous for anyone who doesn't know to turn back, like we did." Derek, who had been quiet for most of the ride, shrugged. "And say what? That we got stuck in a time loop? They'd think we were crazy." Sarah, who had a fondness for paranormal stories, added, "Or they might already know and just never told the public. Maybe that's why that old map was hidden away and not posted at the gas station for everyone to see." Tom nodded, considering their points. The possibility that authorities might already be aware and had chosen to keep it under wraps was unsettling, but plausible. However, the adventurer in him felt a spark of excitement at having experienced something truly extraordinary. The conversation helped them process their night's experience, and by the time they reached the campsite, they had agreed to keep it to themselves for the moment. Setting up their tents gave them a sense of grounding, the physical activity helping to dissipate some of the tension that had built up. Throughout the day, between hiking and preparing meals, the topic of the loop came up several times. Each discussion seemed to peel back a layer of the mystery, yet it also compounded their fascination with what they had encountered. They explored several theories, from scientific anomalies and magnetic fields to more fantastical explanations like portals and alternate dimensions. That night, around the campfire, Tom proposed a toast to unexpected adventures and safe escapes. "May we always find our way back, no matter how strange the road." The group clinked their cups together, the sound mingling with the crackle of the fire. The stars overhead were bright and clear, a vast sea of possibilities stretching out above them. It was a stark contrast to the loop they had escaped, and under the vastness of the open sky, the loop seemed even more like a distant dream. As they retired to their tents, the mystery of the looping road remained unsolved. Tom lay awake for a while, staring at the canvas of his tent bathed in moonlight. The experience had changed something fundamental in him. There was a world of mysteries out there, hidden just beneath the surface of the everyday, waiting to be uncovered. He drifted off to sleep with a resolve to return to that stretch of road one day, armed with more knowledge and maybe, just maybe, a way to understand or prove what had happened. For now, though, the adventure was enough, and the escape was a story they would share amongst themselves, a secret bond forged in the shadow of an unexplained phenomenon. Story 4. The Faceless Motorist. Elaine, a seasoned nurse, was driving home from a grueling late shift at the hospital. The roads were unusually quiet, the stillness of the night only punctuated by the occasional gleam of streetlights reflecting off her car's dashboard. The familiarity of the route offered little in the way of excitement, but tonight, her drive took an unexpected turn. As she rounded a particularly desolate stretch of highway, her headlights caught the glint of a vehicle parked on the side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked feebly in the darkness, an urgent Morse code in the quiet night. With a deep sense of duty nurtured by years of responding to emergencies, Elaine slowed her car to a stop behind the stranded vehicle, her instincts as a nurse kicking in. She could discern that it was an old sedan, its once glossy paint now dulled and scratched, the car seemingly empty, yet the engine was still running, its soft purr a stark contrast to the silent night. Elaine approached the car cautiously, her own headlights illuminating its interior in brief, bright flashes. She tapped on the driver's window, but received no response. Peering inside, she confirmed that the car was indeed empty. The sight was unsettling. Why would someone leave their car running at the side of a deserted road in the middle of the night? Turning around to scan the roadside, Elaine felt the sharp sting of the cold night air against her face, the darkness around her seeming to close in. There was no sign of the driver, no indication of where they might have gone. Feeling a mix of concern and curiosity, she considered her options. She couldn't just leave. What if someone was in trouble, perhaps wandered off into the night, injured or in distress? With a sense of unease tightening in her chest, Elaine decided to investigate further. She walked along the edge of the road, her flashlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. The beam flickered over bushes and trees, casting long, ominous shadows that danced just out of sight. After a few minutes of searching, she found no one. The quiet was pervasive, pressing in on her eardrums like the weight of the ocean. As she returned to her car, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Glancing back at the empty sedan, she hesitated, her hand hovering over her car door handle. The night seemed to pulse with a silent anticipation. Then, from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of something or someone sitting in the driver's seat of the stranded car. Her heart leapt into her throat. Elaine whipped around, flashlight raised, but there was no one there. She blinked, her mind racing to make sense of it. Had her eyes deceived her? Was it just the play of light and shadow? With a deep, steadying breath, she forced herself to approach the sedan again. This time, she opened the driver's door, the interior light flicking on, and confirming the car was still empty. No sign of the figure she thought she'd seen. Shaken, Elaine decided it was time to leave. She called the highway patrol to report the abandoned vehicle, her voice steady over the phone despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. As she waited in her car for the authorities to arrive, she kept her doors locked and her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that inexplicable figure appear again. The patrol car arrived within minutes, its blue lights slicing through the night. Elaine spoke briefly with the officer, explaining her discovery. He noted her report with a nod, assuring her they would handle it from here. As she finally drove off, Elaine couldn't help but glance back at the sedan. The patrol car's lights flooded the scene, casting deep shadows into the woods beyond. The drive home was silent and tense, Elaine replaying the night's events in her mind. The roadside encounter had left her with more questions than answers. Who had left the car? What was the meaning of that fleeting figure in the driver's seat? As the streetlights guided her home, the shadows seemed to whisper secrets just beyond her grasp, the night forever altered by the mysterious encounter on a lonely stretch of highway. Elaine's drive home was shrouded in a thick veil of unease. Her mind replayed the chilling scene at the roadside, the empty car, the feeling of being watched, and the fleeting glimpse of someone or something in the driver's seat. As she turned onto her street, the familiar sight of her own home brought a slight comfort, but the mystery of what she had encountered lingered, refusing to be dismissed. Once inside, Elaine found it impossible to settle. Her professional training as a nurse had taught her to handle emergencies with a calm demeanor, but nothing in her career had prepared her for the unsettling nature of this experience. With sleep far from reach, she sat down at her kitchen table, a cup of tea in hand, and took out her laptop to search for any similar occurrences in the area. Perhaps understanding that she wasn't alone in her experience would provide some semblance of peace. Her search led her to a local news archive, where she typed in a combination of terms: highway, abandoned car, ghost sightings. The results were more numerous than she expected, and her curiosity deepened as she clicked through the articles. Several accounts from other drivers detailed similar mysterious encounters along the same stretch of highway, abandoned vehicles, unseen presences, and inexplicable phenomena. It seemed that Elaine's experience was not unique, which was both a relief and a new source of dread. Among the stories, one particularly resonated with her, a tale about a faceless driver who appeared to motorists on desolate roads, always at night and always alone. The story was accompanied by an old police report from several years ago about an unidentified man found deceased in his car under mysterious circumstances on the same highway. No cause of death was determined, and no family ever came forward. The locals had begun to whisper that his spirit lingered, doomed to repeat his last moments forever. The digital clock on her stove blinked 3 a.m. Elaine realized she had fallen down a rabbit hole of ghost stories and unresolved mysteries. She closed her laptop, her mind swirling with the ghostly tales of the highway. Deciding she needed some air, she stepped out onto her back porch, the night now silent except for the distant hoot of an owl. As she stood there, trying to clear her head, the sensation of being watched crept over her again. She turned sharply, half expecting to see someone behind her, but there was only the empty yard and the shadows of her garden furniture. The feeling, however, did not subside. It felt as if eyes were on her from the darkness. Determined to not let her imagination get the better of her, Elaine went back inside, locking the door behind her. She decided to make a plan. Tomorrow, she would go back to that stretch of highway during the day, maybe seeing the place in sunlight, bustling with the mundane flow of daytime traffic, would dispel the night's shadows and her fears along with them. The next day, equipped with her determination and a strong cup of coffee, Elaine drove back to the location of the abandoned car. The daylight transformed the highway. What had seemed menacing under the cover of darkness was now just a regular road, with trucks rumbling by and cars zipping along. She pulled over near where she had seen the car, her eyes scanning the area. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual debris that accumulates at the side of busy roads. Elaine got out of her car, her footsteps crunching on the gravel. She walked around, looking for anything that might explain the previous night's events or her overwhelming sense of being watched. After a few minutes, she admitted to herself that there was nothing here to find. Whatever had happened last night was gone, erased by the light of day. Elaine's drive back home was pensive. She mulled over the old police report and the stories of the faceless driver. Perhaps some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved, existing in the space between reality and superstition. As a nurse, she was trained to rely on what she could see, touch, and heal, but last night had reminded her that some things defy explanation. Settling back into the routine of her daily life, Elaine kept the memory of that night tucked away, a chilling reminder of the unknown that lurks just out of sight on lonely roads in the dead of night. The faceless driver never appeared again in her rearview mirror, but the mystery of that night drove Elaine to respect, and perhaps even fear, the unknown parts of the world that remain unexplained.